without having to study up on it, you'll find out firsthand that there comes a time where, as parents, we can't control anymore. And sometimes parents that are controlling, watch this, parents that are controlling is simply because they have a fear. I don't want them to make the same mistakes I made. I don't want them to go through hardship. I don't want, and you know what? We have to understand that God is in control of their lives as well. And sometimes it can be a form, it can be even be a form of witchcraft when we try to manipulate and control our kids. Especially when they're in their 20s and 30s, and some even 40s and 50s are trying to be controlled. Parents, that's a form of witchcraft, trying to control. You have to get to the point, and it's hard. It's hard. Man, I'm telling you it's hard. I'm telling you firsthand it's hard. But I've learned to just say, God, you're in control, and go on. But tell me, why did you write that?
I think the main reason I wrote that is because when I read the first title, Faith Over Fear, the first thing that always comes to mind is Lucas and his birth and everything we went through. And Trey laid it out perfectly for me the other day. He's like, you, throughout your pregnancy, you tried to do the best you could with everything, and we were always watching this and all my knowledge that I had about, child development and everything, and I was always trying to control the way things were going to go and how they shouldn't go, and that was my main reason for writing that, is because when you try to control everything, you're not acting out in faith.
Ooh, that's good.
You're putting everything like it's all up to you, and when it comes down to it, you can try to control as much, or I did, in my personal experience, try to control as much as I could, and we still went through what we went through at his birth, almost losing him, and that was that was my big eye-opener, just reminding myself that God is in control no matter what. No matter what I tried to do, no matter what I tried not to do, in the end, it was all in God's hands.
Sure. You said something powerful. When we are always trying to control things, we don't act out in faith. We're not walking in faith. Isn't that good? And I'm going to tell you something. Not only as parents, but sometimes as pastors, sometimes we can kind of get over-controlling. Because, now, in my part, and you can add to this, or maybe I'm just a little far out there, Pastor Kerry, but, growing up here, learning ministry, Pastor was always big on excellence. We got to do it right, excellence, this, that, whatever. We'd go over it and over it and over it until we got it, things like that. And he would always demand excellence from us. So I grew up making sure that things were here, were there, to the point that it got where I was controlling without realizing. So there were some things that I didn't start walking by faith in. I'll give you an example. When I finally realized, hey, what's wrong with you, man? We were doing a get together, and we just had to make, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 dozen hot dogs, and I was in charge of that. But another young man was helping me, and he was making the hot dogs, whatever. Well, it got to the point where, I was like looking over his shoulder, man, making hot dogs. But it was important to me because I wanted to make sure they were on point. They were on time. They were cooked. They were ready. They were getting ready to serve all this stuff, and I was just there. The kid wanted to help me do this. He was trying to serve, and he's there flipping hot dogs. Make sure you get that one. Oh, that one's been a little too long. Finally, he said, Pastor, I got this. Don't worry about this. Let me do this. And then I realized, I got to chill out, man. This is hot dogs, man. So I started thinking, man, what else am I this possessive or controlling over? There's some things we got to walk by faith, but that was really powerful.
Yeah. And I truly believe that what's so important for the believer, we're talking about control and fear, is believer's life is all about surrender.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not about control. It's all about surrendering everything completely over to the Lord, right? That's really what it's about. It's surrendering your thoughts. It's surrendering your life. It's surrendering your family completely over to the Lord, right? My parents had to do that with me when I was a teenager. When I was acting rebellious and acting like an idiot, my mom and my dad were like, we're just going to surrender you over to the Lord, because we can't control you. We can't fix you. We have to completely give it over to the Lord, right? And that's hard for a parent to do, right? It's completely hard because you want to be able to have a say in every little thing, right? But the reality is, as a believer, what our response should be is surrender, right? And I know it sounds easier said than done.
Yeah.
But the reality is we do want to control, even in ministry as pastors. I mean, look, man, I was a youth pastor for 13 years. Trust me.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to want to get a room full of kids under control, but and all that sort of stuff, right? But the reality is, even when working with kids, it's all about just surrendering everything over to the Lord. So when it comes to that, man, if you're someone in here who really battles with control, right? Like this is something you deal with. Maybe you're a husband who wants to control his wife, a wife who wants to control her husband, a parent who wants to control their kids, or whatever it is, right? I would encourage you to look at the scriptures, because again, our response as believers in everything from our faith is all about surrender, right? It's all about surrender, giving everything over to the Lord. You know what I'm saying? When I got married, I wanted so bad to be the perfect husband, but then I realized I'll never be the perfect husband. I'm going to fail over and over again, right? I really am. And so I had to surrender that ridiculous mindset to the Lord, and it's helped me, to be a husband, not out of fear of, man, am I going to make mistakes, whatever. But again, I would just want to encourage you, if you're someone here who struggles and battles with control, I want to encourage you to surrender that to the Lord, because again, I truly believe that the life of a Christian it starts with surrender. God, I'm all yours. I'm in your hands. You know what I mean?
Yeah, one of the things that I learned, as a parent, kids growing up, is if you constantly control things that are happening in your kids, and when I say kids, I'm talking about 20-year-olds that are already adults and things like that. Whenever you just always control, what happens is you get in God's way of trying to be God in their life. You get that? And we need to get out of the way. But let's get into this, because here's where fear and faith started. You talked about in your notes about an experience or the experience of your journey from conception to pregnancy and birth of Lucas. There was a lot of stuff that happened in there, faith and fear. For people that don't know, take us through that journey.
I guess I'll try to compact it in
No,
a little bit,
we got
and
time.
y'all bear with me if I get a little emotional. But so basically, Trey and I got married very young. We got married at 19.
I did the ceremony, by the way.
Yeah, he did. We were 23, 24 when we started talking about wanting a family and wanting to have children. It was something kind of scary to us to think like, oh, we're gonna have kids. Like this is, it was a weird conversation to have at first, because we were just so used to being us and our dogs, and we would travel, get up and go whenever we wanted to, we had that want, of having kids. And we tried for about a year and a half, and it just wasn't happening. And we kind of tried not to get discouraged, and we prayed about it. And I remember New Year's Eve 2017, it snowed, so we decided to stay home. And that was when we kind of, again, surrendered. We prayed. I remember ringing in the new year, praying together, Lord, if you give us a child, it's your will. If you don't, it's your will. And we're going to learn to be okay with that and accept it. That was in New Year's Eve, of course. And so 2018, I had an annual checkup. I went into the doctor, and she kind of ran some tests, because I talked to her, that we were thinking about having a family. And she ran some tests, and she came back and she told me, she's like, I don't want to give you a diagnosis right now. She's like, but you're borderline PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so she's like, that would make sense why you haven't been able to get pregnant yet. And so she told me, she's like, I don't want to officially diagnose you, but I want you to try this. she handed me like this packet, and it was a diet. Because the main reason behind that is blood sugar levels. And so she handed it to me, and I kind of was like, a diet? Like, but she explained it to me, and I was like, that makes sense, And I remember going home, and she's told me, she's like, come back in 2 months, and if this doesn't help change your levels, we'll, talk further about other things. So I went home, and I showed it to Trey, and we kind of looked at each other and were like, dang, that's going to be hard, because it was pretty much cutting out all sugar from my diet. Like really, and it's not just and I'm a sweets person, so that was my weakness. Yeah. So, but it wasn't just sweets. You would be so surprised that everything pretty much nowadays has sugar in it. So our grocery, and I told Trey, I was like, you know what? We were praying for a child. I went to the doctor. This is what she told me. It may not have been what I wanted to hear, but she's giving me these tools. And sometimes God gives us tools to, get to where we're wanting to, what he wants us to do. And so I saw it as that. I didn't really think of it as, man, I have to be on a diet. I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to her, and I'm going to try my best because this is what she's giving me. So our grocery trips would take 10 times longer because we were sitting there reading all the labels, and ketchup, mustard, everything had sugar in it. Certain fruits, I couldn't eat certain fruits. No cow's milk. It was just everything. It was a whole overhaul. And so my checkup to follow up with her was in April. This was in February. Come April, kind of just, was doing the diet and everything. And I got a notification on my phone that my appointment was coming up. And I was on a Tuesday in April at the end of the month. Well, I took a test that Monday, and I was pregnant. Wow. And I kind of was like, does that say positive? Because I had taken tests before, and I was like, that says positive. And I took 6 tests. I remember calling into work, and I was like, I can't come in today. I'm sick. Wow. Whatever.
Don't take sugar out of your diets, man. It's dangerous.
So, yeah, I called the doctor. She wanted me to come in right then and there to confirm everything, to check my levels, and it was confirmed. I remember Trey coming home, and I told him, and we were just bawling, and right then and there, just kept praying. And the next thing that brought a lot of fear to us was when she asked me, do you want to do a genetic test? It'll help you find out the gender. That was at 10 weeks. And I said, yeah, let's do it. I didn't know about that. And so she's like, yeah, it's something fairly new. We did it. She called me a couple of days later. She's like, so do you want to know the gender right now? And I was like, no, I'm okay. You can tell us later. I want it to be a surprise. She's like, okay, well, I do have to tell you about the other results. She said, you're positive. You came back as a carrier for cystic fibrosis, which it affects the lungs. It attacks the lungs. And she said, if your husband is also a carrier, your son has a really high chance of being born with that. So right then and there, I hang up the phone, and just, fear wants to start taking over. Because I was like, we prayed for this baby, and now there's a high chance that he could be sick. He could be born really sick. But Trey came home, and I explained it to him, and we just started praying, and we're like, you know what, we're going to pray, and we're going to believe that you are not a carrier, and that this is not going to affect him. So he went in and did the blood work, and the results came back, and praise God, he wasn't a carrier. So we were happy for those news. But then here comes the time of birth, and my water broke on New Year's Eve. He was already a week late from then. I go in, it's 3 or 4 in the morning on the 31st. I was in labor for 25 hours.
Wow.
And he was born on New Year's Day. It was pretty scary and traumatic in that moment when everything went down, just because, we're first-time parents. This is our first, time going through anything like that. But with my background, I worked with kids birth through 3 that did have medical conditions that needed, intensive therapy and things like that. So I would see firsthand things that that kids would have to, struggle with as babies, the therapies that they would need, things that would happen during birth that would affect them for the rest of their lives. And so he aspirated meconium, which if a lot of you might not know what that means, but basically when he was in getting ready to be born, a lot of the substances went into his lungs, and his heart rate was totally normal during the entire process of, those 25 hours pretty much. Like that, it went from about 120 to 60. So his heart rate was so critically low that they had to rush me to the OR. And I can only imagine Trey, because he had no idea really what was going on. He just knew that they were rushing me out. And in that moment, I could just remember praying, because I knew exactly what had just happened. And I had worked with children that this had happened to them. And I knew what the outcome could be for him. And so I was just praying in that moment, praying. And my entire pregnancy, I remember singing to Lucas, "My God is so big, so strong and so mighty." And I would sing it throughout my pregnancy. And I used that to calm me down in that moment, because they're like, they're running, like there's all these nurses around me. My doctor's right there. They're pushing me down to the OR. And they had to put me under because my epidural didn't work. So I could still feel everything. And the last thing I heard was my doctor asked me, "Did you feel that?" That was the last thing I remember hearing. And so they put me under. I remember waking up in a totally different room. And Trey wasn't next to me. My baby wasn't there. There was a nurse next to me. And I just remember bawling and waking up and asking her, "Where's my husband?" And she said, "He's downstairs with your son in the intensive care unit." And I just was like, "I need him here." And she's like, "We'll go get him. We'll go get him." And I just kept praying. And I remember going in and out because, again, the anesthesia, they had to put me under. So I couldn't even breathe at times. Wow. And, I was sitting there praying. And then he came to my side. And he had this video of Lucas. And his eyes were wide open, alert. But he was intubated. He had all kinds of wires all over him. And so, when you picture having a baby, you're like, oh, you get to hold your baby. And it was totally different for us, And Trey was like, he's okay. He's stable. He's in the NICU. And so that was in the morning. He was born like at 5 in the morning on the 1st. They cut him out in 7 minutes. So from the time they rushed me out of that room to the OR, within 7 minutes he was out. Wow. Like if my doctor, I know God was with her. I know God had his hands over her, because if she had not acted as fast as she did, he wouldn't be here with us today, or he would have had probably a lot more issues and, damage to his brain, to his organs. And so, that was in the morning. By the end of the day, I got to walk down to meet him. And I just remember going up to him and wanting to hold him. And the doctor told me that was there, "You can't pick him up. Y'all can't hold him. He's too fragile right now. All you can do is put your hands on him." And I just remember thinking to myself, this is exactly what we need to do right now, is just pray over him and just put our hands on him. Like, that's all we can do. And, it was hard seeing him there, and he would look at us and, respond to our voice and cry, and I couldn't pick him up to comfort him. I could only put my hands on him. And when I was preparing for this, I looked up some verses, and Proverbs 16:9, no, where is it? I thought I wrote it down, but it basically talks about stretching out your hands and believing and speaking healing. And fear was wanting to take over me in that moment, big time, because I knew what could have happened or what did happen to him. And I remember asking the doctor that came to my bedside, "Please be honest with me. Is he okay? Is he gonna be okay?" And all she told me was, right now, all I can tell you is that he's stable. And so, you know, we went down there and we didn't get to hold him till he was 3 days old. And I remember when we went down to meet him on the second day, one of the doctors came up to me and she told me, you know, at one point, I thought we were going to have to call a priest. She's like, but he's going to drive y'all out of here.
Wow.
And I just, inside, I was just like, that fear wanted to take over me. Like, my son almost died. Like, what is going to happen with him? Like, is he going to have an okay life, you know? And when she said, he's going to drive you out of here, if you know Lucas now, you know, like, I laugh about that now because if you know him, like, it makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And so we just kept praying over him. Everybody around us, you know, people would call and check in on us. And, you know, they're like, we're praying for y'all. We're praying for y'all. Trey and I would go back up to the hospital room and we would just pray together. I got discharged, went home without him. And I remember being home and my dog, we've had a German Shepherd for a long time. And German Shepherds are really anxious dogs. And I remember him walking around the house, whimpering, going up to my stomach and whimpering. And it's like, our baby's not here, you know? And it was tough, you know, coming home and not having him. And that's when me and Trey just like, I feel like that brought us even closer because we would just sit there and we would just hold hands. And sometimes we would just cry. Like, we wouldn't even say anything.
Wow.
But we continue to pray and press on and have that faith. And you know, not just pray, but speak. Like, you are going to heal him. And I know that he's going to come home. Things are going to be okay. And at 4 days old, I finally was able to hold him. He got unhooked from the oxygen. He just continued and continued. And then I remember when they told us, y'all can spend the night with him here in the hospital. Wow. And Trey gave me this little book whenever I found out I was pregnant. And it's about prayers. And on day 7, which was the day that we spent the first night with him, he was completely unhooked off of everything. And it's called The Breath of God. And when I read that it took a whole new meaning to me, you know, because God breathes life into us. But at that point, it's like, my son is breathing on his own.
Wow.
You know, his lungs were scarred. They were bad. They showed us the x-rays. And they're like, we won't know how this will affect him as he gets older, but we know that right now he's doing well and he can go home and he can be with y'all. And yeah, like, it was, when we came home, that's when the fear kept wanting to take over. Like, is he breathing? Is he okay? You know, getting up constantly, checking on him. And we continued
Did
to
that
press
just
on.
bring that fear? Did that just bring in more wanting to control things?
And I'll be the first to admit it, you know, like, I was worried, you know, what if he gets sick? You know, his lungs aren't 100%. You know, the doctors told us they're not super healthy, but they're not terrible, you know? And yeah, that fear constantly wanted to creep in. Even now, as he's older, he was finally diagnosed with allergies and borderline asthma because of all of that. Mm-hmm. And it's still, you know, I have to remember God has him. He's okay. God's healed him. You know, knowing that what he went through, it's like one of the leading causes for death and severe illness in births. And when I was looking it up, I didn't even know it only happens like in 5 to 10% of births. Wow. And I mean, God helped him beat the odds.
Amen.
You know, and that he every time I look at him and when he's climbing windowsills and acting crazy, I remind myself, you know, he's here. God had his hands on him, on the doctors, on everybody, you know, and it's still scary to think of everything that we went through. And sometimes I still get really emotional, but I laugh at it now, like that statement, because wow, you know, that's all I can say is God worked.
Now, when you're going through all this, you know, you know, you're praying, you're trying to do what you can, read and things like that. Did you have a solid relationship with God? Did you and Trey have a solid relationship with God? Where were you at?
I like to say lukewarm.
Lukewarm.
Because I was baptized in the 11th grade. I made that decision on my own. I never grew up religious. Trey was raised Catholic. He did all his sacraments and everything his whole life. And so when we got married, we decided we wanted to have a relationship with God. We wanted to, get closer and, continue that. And it took us a while to actually start going to church, and before Lucas was born. And so, like, we were doing what we could at home. Like, we would pray, we would read our Bible, but nowhere near where we should have been.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you feel like, with all of this, do you feel, I know you said it brought y'all closer together. Do you feel that this also opened the door for you guys to really, like, come to God?
Yes, 100%, for sure. Because it was not just, like, what we saw before us of what Lucas was, like, everything that happened, but it's just every day, like, it's a reminder, like, pressing into that faith, and God is for you,
Amen.
and not just praying and listening to worship songs. It's much more than that. It's a lot deeper, and it 100% brought us closer. And I'm not going to say that everything was perfect after that,
Sure,
that we,
sure.
it's still, I mean, up until we started coming to church here after Eliana was born, it's still, we had a lot of surrendering to do, a lot more.
Wow. This is powerful because we're talking about this faith over fear, and she just said something about even today, sometimes that fear still tries to come. That's why we have to keep on pressing in faith
Yeah.
all the time, because fear has a way of checking on you.
Mm-hmm.
Come back, check on you, come back, check on you. And if you're weak in faith at a certain moment, fear can come back in and try to take that control again, And now, because of time, we're not going to be able to get into it, but just to give people an understanding what we'll talk about, and maybe we'll do this next month. But now, you've got your first baby. Now things are looking better now. You've got some experience in working with kids and being a parent, this and that, whatever. But you grew up in a very dysfunctional family, correct? Just give us
Correct.
kind of an idea, and then we'll introduce it, and then come back and talk about it, because it's just starting. This journey with Lucas is just getting started, because then you go through some tough stuff, right? Some tough years.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up, my parents separated when I was like 5. I have younger siblings. My mom wasn't living the best life. It was up until recently that she gave her life to the Lord. We were always up and down, I'm a first generation Mexican American. Both my dad and my mom were born in Mexico. Back and forth all the time, and never really had a strong example of not just serving the Lord, but just being a wife, being a mom. A lot of that was never really something that I grew up experiencing. It was always mostly just like, take care of yourself, take care of your sisters, and so that was hard. Also, pressing through all of that and pushing myself to go to school, to finish high school. I was the first one to graduate high school in all of my immediate family. First one to obtain a college degree. And so a lot of that was, I wouldn't say on my own, but getting baptized at the 11th grade made the world of a difference. I don't know where I would be if that wouldn't have happened.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I met Blanca years ago before she started dating my cousin at a youth conference or youth event or something. I went to go speak. I was a speaker there. And then later on, she met Pastor Carey through that. And Pastor Carey didn't even know who she was or whatever. But and then later on, I found out she was dating my cousin. And I'm like, but what are you doing dating him? You're a believer, man. What's wrong with you? But anyway, that's another story, all right? I stayed out of that. Control, let go, all right? Anyway.
The retired dirt bike racer.
Yeah, the retired dirt bike racer. It's got a lot of history. What's so crazy is, he and I are cousins, but then she was talking about some things about her dad and where he came from. it just so happened that her grandparents come from the same community that my wife's grandparents come from. In, where's that at?
Durango, Mexico.
Durango, Mexico. So
Small world.
we're like cousins, all right? So anyway, but it sounds weird, but it's
Yeah, it
not weird.
does.
It doesn't get weird, okay? But anyway, any last things that you want to share concerning some fears that you went through and how you went through faith? Because the story that goes on of her background is pretty deep, and hopefully we'll get into it next time. But anything that reminds you, when we go through series like this, does it remind you of something that very important that you want to encourage somebody about?
The fear of being a good mom. And I remember having that fear again, like you said, it visits you, you know. When I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, that fear of, am I going to be a good mom to my daughter? I've never really, not that I didn't, but my mom, like I said, wasn't living the best life. We didn't have a relationship. It's only been about 2 years since I've been in contact with her again.
You
And
lost contact with her when you were how old?
17. Full off, no contact at 17.
Wow.
But before that, it was so spotty. Like, I would see her a couple months later.
So you weren't
back
raised
and
by her?
No, not really. And so, that fear, when I found out I was going to have a daughter, that fear wanted to, and I remember crying to my husband and telling Trey, I'm so scared that I cannot be a good mom to my daughter. And I remember praying and saying, God, please, I know you're with me. Please equip me to be a good mom to my kid, not just my son, but my daughter, and lead her to you and have her grow up to love you as well. And so, that fear, it'll find you when you're weak.
You know, Pastor Kerry, in doing this series, I never even thought about people having fears of being good fathers or good mothers, that it can consume them. Never thought about that. You know, what a powerful, powerful subject to know. Or even when you mentioned, the fear of maybe not being a good husband. I mean, it's not a fear that sometimes has consumed me, so therefore, I didn't even think about it, but hearing it now, it's powerful. And I'll let you recap some stuff.
No, I just want to, one of the biggest things I take away from your testimony, from you and Trey's testimony, is this, that all of us can learn to apply to our everyday life, is that when they were faced with a situation that really fear could have overtaken them and controlled their lives, I'm a firm believer that first words matter. And if you notice in their story, every time something came against them, the first thing they did was they got together and prayed as a couple. They got together and they prayed as a couple. Wow. Whether it was when they found out they were pregnant, whether it was when they got news, whether it was when they were in the hospital, they got together and they prayed. See, that's so, so important, y'all. First words matter. They really, really do. How you respond immediately, I truly believe, matters. You hold on to that promise. That's what I love. Hebrews 10:23, it says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Hold fast without wavering. Hold fast without wavering. That's one thing I love about their story, is that with all the events, everything, all the news, you remember that song, Whose Report Will You Believe? Mm-hmm. Man, that's old school, right? We shall believe the report of the Lord, right? That's one thing I love about their story, when they were told that we were going to have to get a priest in here, that it's not that fear wasn't trying to get to them, but that they first words mattered. They held on without wavering the promise that God had given them, and they began to pray together. And so, there's so much right there. You know what I'm saying? And so I just want to encourage y'all, just from their story, man, first words matter. When you find yourself in a situation where, fear is trying to overtake y'all, or a situation is trying to come against y'all, the first words matter.
Yes.
Respond in faith. Hold fast without wavering to the promises of God. Okay, it may not make sense right then in the moment. It may look blurry. It may look uncertain, but hold fast without wavering. Hold fast without wavering. You know what I mean?
Hey, as we get back, maybe in November, because we're going to be talking about level up, going from faith to faith. We're going to talk, hopefully, in depth about now your experience with, you have kids, but now chaos is happening with your past, right? And then you fall into a depression. Just so many things happen, and we're going to talk about how God brought you out of that. And so we're going to talk about that because it's deep. But how many of you are blessed tonight? Amen? So when you see this little boy running around, ain't nothing wrong with him. Number one. Number two, always when you see him, say, that's a miracle right there. That's a miracle. And now you know why they're so grateful and they're so happy.
I just want to say something really quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Before we even knew we were having a boy or a girl, we had picked names. And we love the name Lucas. And Lucas means bringer of light. And his middle name is Daniel. And when I remember bringing him home, all I could think was Daniel in the lion's den. You know, like that was meant to destroy him. And it, you know, like look at him running around. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that and end with that.
I just want to say too, you know, as a church, let's believe and confess Psalms 91 over Lucas's life and body.
Yes.
If you never read Psalms 91, I encourage you, first of all, to be praying that over yourself, your family members. But let's join together. I mean, just a portion, verse 6. Do not dread the diseases that stalk in darkness, nor the disaster that strike at midday. Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are driving around you, these evils will not touch you. Just open your eyes and see how the wicked are punished. If you make the Lord your refuge, he will make, if you make the Most High your shelter, no evil will conquer you, and no plague will come near your home.
Amen. Praise God. For those of you watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, we're going to keep on going here as a church, but we can't wait to get with you on the following podcast. God bless. Whew, praise God for that. Amen. What a powerful, powerful testimony. Amen. And